In this lecture, I'm going to cover some of the basic facts of the different structures of the nervous system, and we're going to break up the nervous system into seven basic parts. And we start with the most inferior or most caudal part, and that's the spinal cord. And the spinal cord is divided up, and we identify the spinal cord according to these major sections: the cervical, which is in the neck region, the thoracic spinal cord, the lumbar, and then the sacral. And this is in order from rostral towards the caudal end, or towards the tail end. And the spinal cord basically functions as a connection or relay between the brain and the rest of the body. And so in communicating this bioelectrical information, the human organism can integrate feedback from the periphery to the brain, and the brain can execute commands that will affect the rest of the body. The spinal cord also has a unique feature in that it can carry out certain functions without the direct involvement of the brain, and some of those are just simply referred to as reflexes. The next major portion of the nervous system is the cerebellum, sometimes referred to as the little brain, and the cerebellum is defined by a number of what are called tracts. Specifically in the cerebellum, these are peduncles. But a tract just simply refers to a clearly identified cluster of neurons and axons that convey some particular type of function. And the tracts do not exist only in the cerebellum, they exist throughout the entire nervous system as a way to bring some organization to make the functions of the nervous system much smoother. Specifically to the functions of the cerebellum is involved in many different nervous system activities, two of which include the learning of motor skills to make those skills more efficient, as well as being able to generate motor responses to certain perturbations, and can help to generate fast responses to unexpected obstacles. As we move to the brainstem is made up of three major components: the medulla oblongata, the pons, and in the most rostral portion of the brainstem is the midbrain. The medulla oblongata carries out a number of functions and houses a number of neurons, and these neurons carry out some certain vital functions, such as being involved with digestion, breathing by activating the muscles that will affect the movement of air into and out of the lungs, as well as affecting heart rate. The pons portion of the brainstem conveys information about movement from the cerebrum to the cerebellum, and those instructions, if you will, regarding movement are modified based upon the interactions, the neuron interactions in the cerebellum, and that helps to produce smoother and more efficient movements. The pons also is involved in regulating the function of the medulla oblongata in terms of breathing. So this tells us that within the brainstem, neurons that exist between the medulla oblongata and the pons function to regulate and detect the activity of such neurons between these two portions of the brainstem. As we move to the third part of the brainstem, which is the midbrain carries out certain functions, which includes the regulation of movements of the eyes. And to move the eyes, this involves the activation of small muscles that are connected to the eyeball. The midbrain is also involved in generating reflexes in response to visual or auditory stimuli. As we move in a more rostral direction, the diencephalon is made up of two fundamental parts, or two structures. The first one is the thalamus, and the thalamus contains neurons which transmits or processes sensory information to the cerebral cortex. One example is this concept called proprioception. And proprioception is considered to be a submodality of the sensory function of touch, and it's essentially the conscious awareness of body position and body movement. And that conscious awareness or perception allows us to produce functional movements. To get that information from moving limbs, fingers, hands, the lower extremity, that bioelectric information conveyed via neurons, sensory neurons, transmits through the thalamus. So the thalamus essentially operates as a relay station to convey information from one structure to another, and in this example, it's to the cerebral cortex. The other structure of the diencephalon is the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is involved in a wide-ranging number of functions, physiological functions, not just neural based, but also endocrine based. So the hypothalamus, just to quickly summarize its functions, include autonomic, part of the autonomic nervous system, plays a very important role in the endocrine system, which is involved in the production and secretion of hormones, as well as various visual functions. As we continue to move in the more towards the outer layer of the brain, or the cerebrum, we know the cerebrum is made up of what we just say are two hemispheres, a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And the cerebral cortex is the most superficial layer of the cerebrum, and that has the distinctive wrinkled texture of that surface layer. Additional structures in the brain include three main structures that are considered deep, buried inside the brain. These include the basal ganglia, and these are clusters of neurons located in various positions that play a very important role in regulating motor performance. And so this refers to the activation of skeletal muscles to produce smooth movements. And when there is some sort of pathology to the neurons in the basal ganglia, it results in certain diseases. One includes Parkinson's disease. Another structure is the hippocampus, and the hippocampus is thought to be the site of memory storage, and the amygdala, or amygdaloid nuclei, refers to these clusters of neurons which help to coordinate the autonomic functions of the nervous system, as well as the response to various emotional states in terms of endocrine secretions. On this slide, we're just taking a look at a quick summary of some of those other structures that we see. So we have the thalamus as this central deep structure involved in relaying information between the cerebrum and the rest of the body. The amygdala refers to this very small structure that is deep in the brain, and these other portions include the basal nuclei, or the basal ganglia. Those terms are sometimes used interchangeably. So these different structures of the basal ganglia, you'll see that they're located in different regions, all work together in order to convey bioelectrical input down to the motor neurons that will activate muscles in a manner that will produce smooth movements. So this ends our video on the basic structure of the nervous system.